The prison door closed behind Joseph. But he wasn't there because he had fallen. He wasn't there because he had betrayed someone. He wasn't there because he had chosen sin. Joseph was in prison because he ran from it. And now, in the darkness of that cell, one question became impossible to ignore. Why didn't God open that door? Imagine the scene, the cold floor, the faint light slipping through the bars, the smell of damp stone in the walls, distant footsteps in the corridor, and Joseph sitting in the dark, lifting his eyes every time he heard someone approaching. Maybe it was an answer. Maybe it was an order for his release. Maybe someone had finally discovered the truth. But the door stayed closed. It is easy to remember the Joseph who overcame. Joseph standing before Pharaoh. Joseph with authority. Joseph managing bread in a time of famine. But this video begins before that. It begins with the Joseph who still did not know if he would ever get out. The Joseph who had done the right thing in a place where his side of the story might never be heard. The Joseph who ran from a proposal that could have destroyed his conscience and ended up carrying an accusation he did not deserve. And this is where the question becomes harder, because if God was with Joseph, why was Joseph still in prison? Why didn't his faithfulness open the door immediately? Why did the right choice seem to lead him to the wrong place? Maybe you know that feeling, when you made the right choice and paid for it, when you remained faithful and still lost, when someone promised to remember you and moved on with life, when you waited for an answer and only heard silence passing far from your door. Joseph carried that question night after night. Every morning said the same thing. He was still there, but Joseph did not fall into that cell all at once. Before the bars of Egypt there was a wound, and it began inside his own home. Before the prison of stone, Joseph knew a quieter prison, being hated by the ones who should have protected him. The prison did not begin with chains. It began with looks, with silence at the table, with brothers who could no longer hear his voice, without feeling something darken inside them. Joseph was young. He dreamed big. And he wore a coat that said more than he understood. To him, maybe it was a gift. To his brothers, it was a colorful wound walking through the house. In that family, the father's love seemed to carry a different weight for each son. And Joseph, even without fully understanding the pain it caused, became the visible face of that difference. When he told them his dreams, what was already uncomfortable became a threat. He spoke like someone who still did not understand the weight of what he carried, but his brothers heard it as if the future itself were rising up against them. Their pain may have had a history, but their choice had no excuse. When they saw Joseph coming from a distance, envy was no longer just a feeling. It had become a plan. The coat shone on his body. But to those men, it was not beauty. It was provocation. It was a reminder. It was everything they believed they had never received. And then came the pit, an empty hole, no water, no way out, no explanation. Joseph's first prison had no bars. It had brothers looking down from above. The cruelest part was not only being at the bottom of the pit, it was recognizing the voices above him. It was waiting for help from the very ones who had pushed him down. Maybe Joseph called each of them by name. Maybe he waited for one of them to say, "Enough? We have gone too far." But no one said it. They could still turn back. They could still reach down. They could still turn that moment into shame, repentance, and reconciliation. But they chose another path. When the caravan appeared, their anger found a way to look like business. Joseph stopped being a brother. He became cargo. He became a price. He became a family secret. When they accepted the coins, they were not only selling a young man, they were trying to get rid of a future that made them uncomfortable. Maybe Joseph searched their eyes for some sign of regret. But the dust rose, the steps continued, and no one came. Joseph came out of the pit. But he did not come out of the pain. Now he was going to a land where no one knew his name. Joseph arrived in Egypt alive, but with no control over his own life. He did not enter that land as a traveler. He entered as merchandise. He was taken to Potiphar's house, where everyone seemed to know their place. Potiphar had authority. The servants had duties. Orders moved through the halls. But Joseph arrived at the lowest place in that house. He worked, but he did not choose. He obeyed, but he did not decide. He breathed, but he belonged to another man. And still, there was something in him that slavery could not erase. Joseph watched. He learned. He understood the rhythm of the house. He noticed what needed to be done before anyone gave an order. Little by little, small tasks became greater responsibilities. Responsibilities became trust. Trust became management. And Potiphar's house began to pass through Joseph's hands. For the first time since the pit, Joseph seemed able to breathe again. It was not freedom, but it was dignity. It was not his father's house, but it was a routine. It was not an answer to everything, but it was a sign that his life might still have a future. This was the false rise. On the outside, it looked like restoration. On the inside, it was still dependence. Joseph had trust, but he still did not have freedom. He had respect, but he still carried the mark of someone who had been bought. Maybe he thought the worst part was behind him. Maybe he believed God was quietly rebuilding his life, not with great answers, but with bearable days, with honest work, with earned trust. But the danger did not come from the street. It did not come from his brothers. It did not come from a desert caravan. It was inside the very house where he was beginning to be respected. There were eyes watching Joseph for another reason. A look that was not trust, not gratitude, not respect. And Joseph did not yet know that the house that seemed to be lifting his life also hid the accusation that would push him even deeper. Because sometimes life does not strike us when we are already on the ground. It waits until we begin to stand. The garment stayed in her hands, and the thing that could have proven Joseph's escape began to tell another story. He left that room without guilt, but he left behind the one thing that would be used against him. First, silence. Then, screams. Then, servants running through the halls. Then, a version of the story Joseph had no time to dismantle. In that house, her voice carried more weight than his truth. Joseph was a foreigner. He was a slave. He was a man with no father nearby, no brothers to defend him, and not a single witness to stand beside his truth. The garment that showed he had run away began to look like proof of guilt. Joseph ran and left the garment behind, but the lie stayed, dressed as evidence, and everything he had built began to fall apart. The trust, the dignity, the respect. The same halls where he had served faithfully now watched him being taken away as guilty. Maybe Joseph tried to explain. Maybe he looked at Potiphar, hoping that some trace of trust still remained. Because Potiphar knew Joseph. He knew his discipline. He knew his faithfulness. He knew the man who had brought order to his house. But in that world, the word of an Egyptian woman weighed more than the truth of a foreign slave. A well-placed lie crushed a lonely truth. Joseph did not suffer because he did wrong. He suffered because he stayed clean. The right decision did not open a door. It closed prison bars over him. He ran from sin and ran straight into a cell. Now Joseph was in prison. But the hardest question was not only why he entered that place, it was why God did not take him out right away. The Bible says God was with Joseph, but the door stayed closed. That sentence is heavy because it does not match what the eyes can see. The air was thick. The light was faint. Every morning repeated the same sentence. He was still there. No one came to review the case. No one asked for his version. No one scheduled his release. The same low ceiling, the same damp wall, the same corridor, the same key that turned for other men, but never for him. And maybe in silence, Joseph asked, God, if you are with me, why am I still here? But Joseph did not only wait for the door to open. Even without an answer, he watched. He noticed faces. He saw who was broken. He listened to the silence of men who no longer expected anything. Maybe he did not have an answer for his own pain, but he could still recognize pain on someone else's face. He was paying for a guilt that was not his. Still, injustice could not steal his ability to serve. And it was right there, in the place where nothing made sense, that Joseph began to notice two different men. Two broken men. Two forgotten men. Two men carrying dreams that seemed to have nothing to do with his future. One knew Pharaoh's cup. The other knew the bread of the royal table. Now both knew the damp smell of prison. That morning, Joseph saw that they were not only sad, they were troubled. They had seen something in the night, and it would not leave their faces. Joseph also carried questions no one answered, but even then, he came closer. No one had listened to Joseph, but Joseph listened to those men. He heard their dreams, and he gave a name to what they could not understand. For one, there would be restoration. For the other, an end. Joseph gave an answer to another man's future, while still having no answer for his own life. He helped someone see a door opening, while his own door remained closed. And when he understood that the cupbearer would return to the palace, Joseph did something deeply human. For the first time in a long time, he did not only serve, he asked. He did not ask for riches. He did not ask for revenge. He did not ask for honor. He asked for only one thing. Remember me. Remember me. That phrase was not small. It was the request of a man who had already been forgotten by his brothers, forgotten by his father's house, forgotten by the truth, forgotten by justice. Now he was asking someone to carry his name out of that prison. For the first time, freedom seemed to have a face. Then that face forgot his name. The cupbearer returned to Pharaoh's cup. He returned to clean clothes. He returned to the halls of the palace. And Joseph returned to the floor of the cell. On the first day, maybe he waited. On the second, he still listened for footsteps. And then the question began to hurt. Did he remember today? But the cupbearer forgot. And not for one night. Not for 1 week, for 2 years. Maybe nothing hurts like being forgotten by someone who promised to remember. The worst part was not only the closed door. It was hearing the key almost turn, and then hearing silence come back. At first, Joseph waited for footsteps. Then he waited for news. Then he waited for the cupbearer. Until, with time, he learned to recognize the cruelest sound in prison. No sound at all. But 2 years later, a dream entered the palace. Not for Joseph, for Pharaoh. Thin cows devoured fat cows. Withered heads of grain swallowed full heads of grain. The most powerful man in Egypt woke up disturbed. He called wise men. He called magicians. He called counselors. But no one could explain it. The palace was full of power, but empty of interpretation. And that is when the cupbearer's memory woke up. Joseph had asked to be remembered, but it was not gratitude that opened the door. It was a crisis no one could solve. The man who forgot Joseph would become the same man used to remind the palace that Joseph existed. So Joseph was called. The forgotten man was taken out of the cell. The same beard that had grown in the years of forgetting was shaved in a hurry. The same skin marked by prison was dressed to stand before the throne. The same voice no one wanted to hear would now be heard by the most powerful man in Egypt. Before, Joseph might have left anonymously. Now, he was summoned by the king. And here the story begins to reveal what the cell had been hiding. Joseph thought the prison had buried his future, but the prison had placed his name in the right corridor. The prison placed Joseph near the cupbearer. The cupbearer, even late, connected Joseph to the palace. Pharaoh's dream opened the door, and the famine that was coming would reveal that Joseph's release was not only about Joseph, it was about many. If Joseph had left earlier, he might have left only free. At the right time, he left necessary. That is the answer the prison was hiding. But it did not look like an answer while Joseph was suffering. Inside, it looked like abandonment. It looked like injustice. It looked like one more day forgotten by God and by men. The cell did not explain the palace. The silence did not explain the famine. The 2 forgotten years did not explain the lives that would one day depend on him. Joseph did not know that the path that seemed to hold him down was carrying his name to the place where his pain would have purpose. That does not make the injustice acceptable. It does not reduce the betrayal of his brothers. It does not erase the lie. It does not make the waiting hurt less. And it also does not mean every pain will be explained right now. But Joseph's story shows something difficult to accept. God can be working even when he does not explain every step. While Joseph saw only a wall, God already saw the palace. While Joseph heard only silence, God already saw a famine coming. While Joseph thought he had been forgotten, God was preparing the moment when his name would be remembered before the throne. Joseph was not positioned only to win, he was positioned to serve. The man sold for coins would one day manage bread to save a nation, and the pain that began with Joseph's brothers selling him would end with Joseph holding bread in his hands for those same brothers. Joseph entered that prison as the victim of a lie, but he walked out of it as the answer to a famine no one could yet see. So maybe the question is not only, why didn't God open the door sooner? Maybe the question is, what if the door has not opened yet because there is something on the other side you still cannot see? Have you ever lived through a season where you did the right thing, but the door stayed closed?